They thought he was just another nobody, old, poor, and out of place. They laughed at his silence, mocked his clothes, and threw him behind bars like trash. But when he quietly showed them a single ID card, those same officers stood frozen. Some even apologized with tears in their eyes. That man wasn't just anybody, he was the kind of person even the FBI stands up for. A quiet man walks in. It was a normal afternoon at the city police station. Officers were sipping coffee, chatting, and finishing up reports. The doors slowly opened, and in walked an old black man. He wore a faded army jacket, dusty boots, and a cap pulled low over his eyes. He didn't speak loudly or act angry. He just stepped up to the front desk and said calmly, "I need to speak to the chief. It's urgent." The officer at the desk raised an eyebrow and gave a small laugh. "You need to speak to the chief." About what? The old man looked him in the eye and replied, "It's not something I can say to just anyone." The other officers nearby chuckled. One said loudly, "We've got another war hero with a story." They didn't take him seriously. To them he looked like just another poor, confused or homeless man with too much pride and too little sense. The old man didn't react. He stood still, calm, and silent. When they asked for his name or ID, he softly said, "I'll give it to the chief only." That was the moment things began to shift. One officer, irritated by his quiet refusal, got up and told him, "You don't get to demand anything here. Sit down, or we'll make you." The man didn't move. He said, "I've come here with respect. Don't make me lose it." That was enough for them to act. They saw it as a threat. Within seconds, two officers walked over, grabbed the old man by the arms, and pushed him toward the back. "We'll let you cool off and holding," one of them joked. As they placed the cuffs on his wrists, the man didn't fight. He didn't shout. He just looked straight ahead with a calm, serious face. They put him in a small holding cell at the back of the station and left him there. Outside, the officers returned to their desks, laughing about how crazy people walk in every day thinking they're someone important. No one knew who that man really was. No one cared to ask. But deep in that quiet man's pocket was an ID that could turn their world upside down, and it was only a matter of time before they found out. Whispers turned to silence. The old man sat quietly in the cold holding cell. He didn't move, didn't speak, and didn't seem worried at all. Meanwhile, the officers outside continued their usual chatter, making fun of the strange visitor they had just locked up. "Says he's got business with the chief," one joked. "Maybe he wants to offer him a job in the army of ghosts." They all laughed. But after about 30 minutes, something unexpected happened. The man politely called out to the officer on duty and asked, "May I have my wallet back, please?" The officer shrugged and walked over to the property box. Grabbing the old, worn leather wallet without a second thought, he slid it through the bars without even looking at it. The man slowly opened it and pulled out an identification card, not the usual kind, but one with a golden eagle seal and high-level clearance marks. Without a word, he handed it back through the bars. The officer took one glance and froze. His hands tightened around the card as his eyes scanned the text. "Department of Defense, clearance level 9. Active security rights." The photo matched the man in the cell. His name was followed by titles the officer didn't even recognize. He blinked and looked again. It was real, and it was powerful. He quietly called another officer over. Soon, 4 men in uniform were standing around. The ID, no longer laughing, no longer joking. Their faces were pale. "Is this some kind of joke?" one of them asked. "No joke," said the officer holding the card. "This is way above us." They rushed to the captain's office and handed him the ID. The captain's face dropped as he read it. He immediately stood up and said, "Where is this man?" "We put him in holding," one officer whispered, now clearly nervous. "You what?" the captain shouted. "Do you know what this card means? Do you know who he is?" Panic spread across the room. They had arrested someone with top-level federal clearance, someone who had access to national intelligence, someone important. The captain picked up the phone and called a number on the back of the ID. Within seconds, he was speaking to someone in Washington. "Keep him safe," the voice said. "Do not question him. We're on our way." That's when the silence fell. All the officers knew. They had just made a very big mistake. The station, once full of casual noise and careless jokes, had gone completely quiet. Officers who had been laughing earlier now paced nervously, whispering to one another and checking the clock over and over. The old man still sat calmly in the holding cell, showing no emotion, as if he already knew what was coming. The captain stood near the front desk, holding the ID tightly in his hand, his face tense. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sound of engines outside. 2 large black SUVs rolled up to the station and stopped directly at the entrance. 4 men in dark suits stepped out, followed by one woman carrying a small silver case. No one had to ask who they were. It was clear from their earpieces, their posture, and their authority. These were federal agents. The officers moved aside without a word as the agents entered. The lead agent didn't introduce himself. He walked straight up to the captain, glanced at the ID, then asked, "Where is he?" "Holding cell," the captain replied quietly. "He's unharmed." The agents walked through the station with calm, firm steps until they reached the cell. The old man stood up before they even arrived. The moment they reached him, the agents stood still, and then, all at once, they saluted him. Every officer watching from behind them froze. They had never seen anything like this. The man gave a slight nod in return, then stepped forward as the cell door was unlocked. "Sir, we apologize for what happened here," the lead agent said. "Respectfully, we're here to take you home." The old man looked at the officers standing nearby, many of whom now looked down at the floor, unable to meet his eyes. He didn't say anything right away. He simply scanned the room, then spoke softly. "Respect should never depend on the clothes someone wears." That single sentence hit harder than any yelling or shouting could have. The agents guided him out of the cell and through the silent station. As he stepped outside, the officers remained still, watching in silence, some with regret written all over their faces. The man they had mocked just hours ago had walked out, not as a criminal, but as a man who outranked them all. As the black SUVs pulled away from the station, the remaining officers stood still, trying to process what had just happened. The air felt heavy with guilt and disbelief. Back inside, the captain gathered the team. In the briefing room, he held the ID in his hands again, his voice low but serious. "That man," he said, "wasn't just some veteran. He was part of an elite intelligence unit. He worked on missions that aren't even public. Some of his records are still classified. He risked his life for this country more times than we'll ever know." The room was silent. No one could speak. The same officers who had mocked him, called him names, and locked him up like he was nothing, now realized they had disrespected a hero. One of the younger officers spoke quietly. "But why didn't he tell us?" The captain replied, "People like him don't boast. They don't need to. They've seen things we can't imagine, and they know that true strength doesn't come from shouting, it comes from discipline and silence." Word began to spread through the town. Someone had recorded a clip of the black SUVs arriving, and soon neighbors were talking. "That man used to live around here," one elderly shopkeeper said. "He saved lives overseas. I remember seeing him in uniform when I was a kid." A few officers who had laughed earlier now sat alone, reflecting on their actions. The silence was no longer from shock, it was from shame. The truth about the old man changed everything. He had walked into the station with respect and calm, but they had responded with disrespect and judgment. They assumed he was poor, unimportant, maybe even mentally ill. But the truth was far from what they expected. He wasn't just a veteran. He was one of the people who had protected the very freedoms they now used to mock others, and he had left them with a message that would stay forever. Respect should never depend on what someone wears or how they look. That truth hit harder than any punishment. That day, the badge on their chest didn't feel as heavy as the guilt in their hearts. They had forgotten what it meant to serve with honor until a quiet old man came in and reminded them without saying much at all. Days passed, but the atmosphere in the police station never quite returned to normal. The laughter had faded. The casual pride some officers once carried now felt hollow. The image of the old man calmly leaving the cell, saluted by federal agents, stayed burned in their minds. His words echoed in the silence. Respect should never depend on the clothes someone wears. The department began to change quietly. Officers who once judged people at a glance started listening more. They took their time, asked questions, and treated every person who walked through the doors with dignity. The captain ordered mandatory respect and diversity training, not because it was policy, but because he now believed it was the right thing to do. One afternoon, the same young officer who had first laughed at the old man sat alone in the break room looking at a printed photo of the ID they had scanned before handing it back. Under the name and credentials was a small inscription: "Service above self. Honor without words." He read it again and again. That man had been through war zones, secret missions, and threats most people couldn't even imagine. Yet he never raised his voice, never showed anger. All he wanted was to speak to the chief, not for fame, not for favors, but likely to share something important, something they never even let him say. And yet, he left without bitterness. That officer, and many others, started to see their badge differently now. Not as a symbol of power, but of responsibility. Somewhere across the country, in a quiet neighborhood, that old veteran sat on his porch, sipping tea as the sun set behind him. He didn't watch the news. He didn't post online. He didn't need the world to know what happened. He had seen the look in their eyes. That was enough. The damage had been done, but so had the lesson. In one silent visit, he reminded an entire station what true strength looks like: calm under pressure, kindness in the face of disrespect, and dignity even when humiliated. And though he may never walk into that police station again, his presence would never leave it. Because sometimes, the loudest message comes from the quietest man. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts. Subscribe to Deep Wounds for more powerful real-life inspired stories that stay with you.